bloody times I've tried to film this video and I've had to start again. I forgot to turn the phone off and it rang. It was a cold caller. I'm really annoyed. So I've just started again. Third time lucky. So, last month, February, I did a review up there in the iCards of Schmincke Horadam 12 half-pan professional set. I then approached Schmincke because someone, I've forgotten who, told me in the comments on that video they have this new colours coming out and I think they do a spot card that they're charging for. So I emailed them and I said, look, I'm a professional product reviewer, can I try your colours? And they said, oh, well, actually, we've just watched your video and we really like it. So, yeah, we'll send you some stuff. And they said the same thing to me that they said to another YouTuber who I cannot remember for the life of me. In Liquid Colour, is that the channel? I'm really sorry. I'm really, really bad with names, which is why, Val, I always call your channel We Burn a Gourd, even though I know it's called Drawing with Fire. I just find it funny because I can never remember the real name. So anyway, they had a video that I just saw a few hours ago going through this set, and that made me go, God, just do it now, stop putting it off. And they said the same thing, that Schmincke said, oh yeah, we'll send you a few extra things. So I looked at what they got sent as a few extra things, and I see your few extra things and I raise you. I got the spot card of the new colours, and there are 35 of them, they go down there. They also sent me new and old colours in pans, tubes. These are full pans and half pans. This is hundreds of pounds worth of paint, and they also sent me their spot card of their entire existing range, which we will be working through over the coming weeks. So I'm going to go through these colours today, and I've looked up all their properties and everything so I can talk you through all of them. And I've got new clean paint water. I've been a good boy, and I think I'm going to use, because it arrived yesterday and I really want to use it, this Pro Art travel brush, which I'll link again in the iCards to my haul video that contained it. It's referred to in the Midas Touch range, I used to call it. I'm saying nothing about the shape of that. And it's a really beautiful little teak effect handle, lovely Proline Plus bristles with a decent bit of snap, but not too much, which is what you want in a watercolour brush. Let's see if we can zoom in. I don't know if we can. I don't know if the lighting's going to let me zoom in. So let me just give it a little try, because it would be nice if we could do this close up. Okay, I'm going to be starting up here. I'm going to take my edge down. There we go. So let's begin with some clean water. Now this is sent on a reasonably good quality watercolour paper, but it's very thin. It's sketchbook watercolour paper really. This brush is a Proline Plus, so it's got a reasonable abrasion to it because it's a synthetic bristle. So we're going to start with 205 Rutile Gelb, Rutile Yellow. And that re-wets really nicely. While I remember to do it, I'm going to just take my Pro marker and give myself some little squares so we can look at transparency, because someone always asks. I'm not going to try and stay inside the box or do anything fancy with diluting it down. I'm just going to paint them in sort of mass tone, if you like. Now the camera isn't, as always, cameras are not very good at capturing oranges. So there is a slight warmth to that, and that colour reminds me a lot of a Naples yellow in other brands. It's PY53, which is nickel antimony titanium yellow rutile, otherwise known in Winsor & Newton as lemon yellow nickel titanate. That's what they call it, but it's the same pigment. So this is obviously probably bigger particles to give it that opacity that it's got. It's got a semi-opacity over that. I mean, it's a reasonably good opacity, as you can see in the video, and it's got a creaminess that is a lot like a Naples yellow, which is obviously a different pigment. So the next one is Quinacridone Gold Tone, Quinacridone Gold Hue. Quinacridone Gold is one of those colours that's no longer manufactured, because as most of you probably already know, pigments are not actually manufactured for watercolour. They're actually manufactured for house paints and car paints and things like that. And when they just cease to be needed, we can't get them at all. So they've made this hue using PY150 and PR101, so nickel azo yellow and red synthetic iron oxide, which is quite an interesting combination of colours. So we'll see how well this works. So they've put an iron oxide, which is sort of notoriously opaque and granulating, in with a nice, yeah, I mean, I can see that's a nickel yellow. It's got the undertone of a nickel yellow. And nickel yellow adulterated is the most common way people are making quinacridone gold hues at the moment. And I'm glad they've labelled it correctly as a hue, because Winsor & Newton are very naughty. They don't label theirs as a hue. They just call it Quin Gold when it's not. And I think that's really bad. I don't like mislabelling of paint. I don't like Viridians that are phthalo green, Mission Gold. I think if you're going to label them, there's got to be some truth in your labelling. So it's lovely and transparent. It flows very nicely. I can't stay inside the lines. I'm terrible. It's because I'm trying to talk to you, look in the thingy on the camera to check I'm in focus, and paint at the same time. And I'm getting shadow because we're focused in, you're seeing the shadow more than you would normally. So just, yeah, get the focus a bit better. You can see there's a lot of orange in that. And when I get to the end, I'll bring them up to the camera. What I'm going to do is paint every other, because I'm not staying inside the lines. So I'm going to jump over to Gelb Orange, which is yellow orange, which is PY110 ISO Indolinone yellow. There's another paint with a very similar name, and I have to be very careful to get them right. So this, I would expect, is a relatively transparent, although it doesn't look it, paint. Lifting beautifully. Really nice, actually. Exactly as they say, it's a sort of orange. What I'm doing is trying to, when I get to the end, resuspend what's around the spot itself, so we get a darker area. There's a lot of paint on these. I mean, I can probably lift enough to paint something from these spots. They're very generous. Next one is Zinnober Hell Vermilion Light, which literally translated from the German is Cinnabar Red Light, which is what vermilion is. And it is obviously not a genuine vermilion. It is Pigment Red 188, which is Naphthol Scarlet Lake, which is a very, very, very pretty colour. It's often used in acrylic. I don't know why it is. Some colours tend to be in the palette in acrylic. There's a lot more reds in acrylic, I find, than there are in watercolour in most brands. You know, the same company will produce a lot of red acrylics and fewer reds in watercolour, and I don't really know why that is. I quite like that. I mean, I'm not a fan of sort of pinky reds. It's not even a pinky red, it's an orangey red with a kind of salmony tone to it. But it's nice. Not my favourite kind of colour, and I'm not sure what I would use it for, but yeah, it's pretty. Next is going to be Perulon Rot Tia. Perulon Rot Tief, sorry. Perulin Red Dark. And this just uses PR178, which is Perulin Red. Now, the Perulins are really gorgeous colours, and Perulin Red is usually very blood-like. And this is a cool Perulin Red, very pretty, nice transparency. It's always a favourite if I want to paint in entirely transparent colours, like if I'm using Milford paper or something like that. I like the Perulins. I find that they work really well for that kind of technique. I'm going to go down a row now onto... I'm going to have to turn the paper upside down at some point as well to get the bottom ones in, because I'm not really the right shape of space to do this properly. Lasse Dunkelrot Transparent Deep Red, which is made with Pigment Red 144, which is... Turn to page 2 of my notes. Azo Condensation Red. There's a couple of azo condensation colours in this set, and you don't often see them in watercolour, so... It's interesting that they've got a couple of them in this new range, and I wonder if other manufacturers are going to do the same. This rewets beautifully. It's a really easy to rewet pigment. Very, very pretty, beautiful transparency. I mean, that is just gorgeous. I think botanical painters will love that colour. That is truly magnificent. And if you want to try and find it in other brands, PR144 if you don't have this one. Next up is Bordeaux Rot, Bordeaux Red, or just Bordeaux as they've translated it. Pigment Red 187, which is Permanent Pink FL. I've seen this pigment used in, I think, the Jane Davenport set, possibly, which is a slightly unusual pigment I don't often see in watercolour. So I was surprised to see it over there, but evidently it's gone onto the market recently for paint production, watercolour paint production, and companies have discovered it, including whoever it is who manufacture her products, which I think is probably Mongyo. And I've forgotten, because I'm really silly, to put my transparency squares in. But we don't need to worry, because once those two are dry, I can paint them. I can add it later, and I'll add it now to all the others so I don't make a total mess of this. And then when I get to the end, I'll just paint another layer. I'll glaze them, and then we'll be fine. It's almost a shame to... These dot charts are so pretty. It's almost a shame to have to draw and write all over them, but it's what they're for. And, you know, brand new paper can look so pretty, but you end up destroying it. It's one of those things. Next up is a colour that I both love and hate in equal measure, Potter's Pink, which is Pigment Red 233, which is Chrome Tin Pink, which is Chromium Tin Silicate. This is usually a bugger to re-wet in most brands, and it granulates like mad. It will actually granulate out of mixes, so you can make gorgeous, gorgeous creamy mixes for like stucco or something like that when you're painting, and it will granulate out. There are a few colours that do it, and they're mostly silicates, which are very hydrophobic. So, okay, it's re-wetting with relative ease. I was expecting more of a war. I'm pleasantly surprised that that's re-wetting well. But then Schmincke's paints always re-wet really well, don't they? And there's good re-wetting well and bad re-wetting well. You know, some paints re-wet too well. I think Schmincke Horadam re-wet well in a good way. They re-wet fast. Other brands I'm not so keen on. I think they re-wet too much and move too much. So it's the right tone. I mean, you don't get much variation in Potter's Pink. It tends to be the colour is exactly the same. I'm not sure how many manufacturers there are of that pigment, so I think that it's probably always ground in the same way. Next up is Quinacridone Purpur, which is Quinacridone Purple. Now this is PV55, which is Quinacridone Purple. This is the pigment that you find in Winsor & Newton's Quinacridone Purple, Quinacridone Violet, that was sold in the Twilight series of Twilight collection of limited edition watercolors that they did. So if you missed that because it's no longer available, you could use this paint, or you could use the Daniel Smith version for those out there who want it. And I know I gave a spot card of this colour from Winsor & Newton to Lindsay the Frugal Crafter, who used it in a video, and a lot of people commented on that video really wanting that purple. So I'm really glad Schmincke have made it available as well. And this is extremely similar to Winsor & Newton. It's flowing in the same way. It's got that gorgeous, vivid purple undertone that you don't get with dioxazine. Dioxazine purple's almost black and not so good in terms of fugitivity, but this is just a magnificent purple. You could use this on flower petals and it wouldn't look fake in the way that colours like Quinacridone Magenta probably would. I really like it. I think it's a really pretty colour. Next up is a colour a lot of people have been raving about, and again it's also the same pigment used in another Winsor & Newton limited edition set, the Desert series, which was the previous collection, so maybe 5 or 6 years ago now that they released that. They had a Phthalo Sapphire in that set as well, both made with PB15:6, which I think is the epsilon form of copper phthalocyanine. So a very, very different blue, and I love this blue, so get ready if you've not seen this before. This is just so beautiful. It's better than Quin Blue, so than Phthalo Blue Red shade, and better than the green shade, I think, as well. I think if you were doing a seascape or something like that on a hot summer's day, or a Mediterranean image or something like that, you could really go to town with this colour. It's got so much depth to it. So pretty. It's not like your normal phthalo blue, green shade or red shade. This is a totally different beast. And when I get to the end, obviously I'll hold these up to the camera. So I'm now going to turn the page and work sideways, because the way I have my setup is that my tripod is on my desk, so I can't actually go close enough to the tripod in a portrait direction, because I'm set up to film landscapes, because that's what I mostly paint. So this one at the top here, I'll move down a tiny bit for you. This is Cobalt Azure, which is Cobalt Azure. It uses PB35, which is cerulean blue. So this is just a variation of cerulean blue. Cerulean blue is usually a little hard to re-wet because it's again a hydrophobic colour, which is why you get the gorgeous granulation with it. I'm going to re-wet my brush a bit because I don't think I had much water on it. To say, I prefer painting in this direction. I always feel more comfortable with paper in the landscape direction. I don't paint people, you see, so I never use the portrait orientation. I think I've done a couple of seascapes that way, and I don't like it. What I prefer to do is paint them landscape and then cut the edges off, to be really honest. I like the bits I don't want. Next up is France Ultramarine, French Ultramarine, which is PB29. As many of you will know, there are many versions of PB29 based on how finely it's ground, contamination, whether it's from lapis lazuli or synthetic, and this one is a synthetic because it's French Ultramarine. And I've just realised I should have skipped one, but I've wetted it now, so I'm going to carry on. Like other French Ultramarines, it's got a very red-blue bias. Absolutely gorgeous, and I look forward to seeing what the granulation's like when we get to the end. So I'm going to skip one now and go over to this one here. And this is a colour I was a bit excited about until I saw what pigments it was. I love green gold. Green gold is one of my favourite colours for, again, sort of summer's day paintings, spring day paintings of grass and so on, of landscape. A beautiful colour, and it's usually made with Ergazan yellow, I think, is the colour they use. And this one is made with PY154 mixed with PBR7. So that is benzimidazolone yellow 154 mixed with brown iron oxide. And that seems weird to me. And I don't know. Jury's out. If you mix yellow and brown, do you get a good green? What you get is a yellow with something that's wanting to granulate on top of it. It is the colour of green gold, but it's got an opacity to it, even though the colour name is transparent green gold. And it is pretty. It's a lovely colour, but it's almost thick and gloopy. I'm not sure I like that colour. Maybe it'll grow on me when it's dry. I do think you should always let colours dry before you really give a viewpoint on them, actually, because they're often so different, especially with texture. Next one is down here, so we're going to have to do some flipping. Right, we'll go across. We're in this together, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to get through this. We're going to go across, and we're going to go to this one here, which is Umbre Grünlich, green umber. And this is PBR7, which is quite simply a brown iron oxide. Wasn't sure if it was the hydrated form or not. Again, there's a lot of variation in iron oxides, and levels of contaminants, how you grind it, will affect the tone. It has got a green undertone, but it's very subtle. I think unless I was wanting to paint en brunaille, namely just in brown alone, I don't think I would need this level of subtlety of difference of my browns to want this colour. I think if you paint en brunaille a lot, you probably would like that colour. Or if you painted landscapes that were very brown, like maybe trees in winter, maybe you'd want that many different browns that granulate, but I personally wouldn't. Next up is Mahogany Brown, Mahogany Braun, I think is the correct pronunciation, Mahogany Brown, which is PBR33, which is a zinc iron chromite brown, and that is another one of those pigments you don't see all that often. Ooh, pretty. This reminds me a bit of a sort of Indian red, but it's got a hellish granulation. And where Indian red and light red are often very flat, this has got a far more interesting granulation to it. Far more interesting tone as well. And a little goes a long way. It's evidently very finely ground, as one would expect from Schmincke. I don't know if I can get the next colour in shot. I can. This one here, Graphite Grau, Graphite Grey, PBK10, which is graphite, the mineral. Graphite is a mineral. It's not synthetically made. It can be synthetically made, but it's not usually. Gorgeous granulation. I'm just starting to get into interesting blacks after trying one from the For Humour's 18th Century line from Wallace Seymour, which is advertised up there. Well, there's a video on it up there, and that's made me start thinking about painting in black and white more often, because there are some really pretty blacks out there now that if you're not trying to put them with colours will look very natural. So very opaque, very granulating. I think that would be very pretty added to pale colours to give them some texture and some light. Let's go back to the top now, because things are drying down, and let's fill in some of those gaps. So the next one is Turner's Gelb, Turner's Yellow, which is PY216, which is Solarplex Yellow, and that is the same yellow that Winsor & Newton sell as Turner's Yellow. I have to say, when I bought it from Winsor & Newton, I couldn't work out what on earth to do with it, because I found it such an unnatural shade. However, this one is much lighter. I think it's more opaque, but it is a lighter hue and it seems to granulate a little bit, so maybe this one would be more useful. The Winsor & Newton one's almost garish, so I quite like this one. Next one is Granien Rot, Geranium Red, which is PR242, which is diazo condensation scarlet, so another of those condensation colours. Oh, pretty. This would make a nice cool, a nice warm red if you were, sorry, a nice cool red. No, warm red, a nice warm red. I'd struggle trying to tell what colour it was then, even though it's a scarlet, so it should be warm. You know, if you wanted to have an alternative to cadmiums and pyrols, that would probably be a really nice one. I'm saying that without knowing how it mixes or what it does, but we will come back to it at some point later and have a proper look. Next up is Quinacridone Hell Rot, which is Quinacridone Red Light, which uses PR207, which is I'm so sorry. I'm having a little brain issue right now. We've just had diazo condensation scarlet. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. It's in my hand the whole time. We've now got PR188, which is Naphthol Scarlet Lake. And I think I've encountered this one before in another brand. Yeah, it looks familiar. I've got a feeling this one's got quite a granulation to it, but I stand to be corrected on that. Little harder to re-wet, or a little more reluctant to flow, perhaps is a better way to put that. Very pretty. A lot of these are a little bit samey at the moment, but I'm sure once they dry down they will look a bit different. And very often when colours do look samey, they do mix obviously and produce different tones. Last one on the row, Rubin Rot Dunkel, Ruby Red Deep. I have got Rubin Rot in a tube that I bought myself a few weeks back that I haven't shown you guys yet, and I love that colour. Rubin Rot itself is simply a PV19 quinacridone violet, but such a beautiful intense colour. This one is a different colour. This one is PR 264, which is Pyrrole Red Rubine, which is the same colour, if my memory serves, that you do find in one of the Jane Davenport sets, or at least there is a Rubine in one of them, I'm sure, unless I'm completely mistaken. So if you've got those sets and you happen to have seen whether there's a PR264, fairly certain there is. It's quite a granulating colour, as the Rubines have a tendency to be. But it's nice, and it does match the Rubine Rot non-Dunkel version, but it's a totally different class of pigments, so something bothers me a little tiny bit about that, because I would prefer it if Ruby Red was a quinacridone, Ruby Red Deep was a quinacridone, just in the same way you often get, you know, a pyrrole and a pyrrole when you're talking about lights and deeps. I think it helps people because you know how they're going to behave as well as just the tone. Next up we have Saturn Rot, which is actually an orange. It is PO64, which is benzimidazolone orange, which is that really common orange you get in virtually every manufacturer's paints. Transparent orange, Windsor orange, I think, is also this colour. Very pretty, lovely kind of bog standard orange. I don't usually use tube oranges on their own, but what I do like them for is mixing with blues to make muddy greens and browns that you can use for foliage on sort of autumn winter kind of paintings. Quin Magenta next, quinacridone Magenta, which is PR202, which is quinacridone Crimson. So let's see how this looks. Oh, that is a nice colour. These new quinacridones they're releasing, that Schmincke have released a whole load, Daniel Smith have released a whole load, there are some really gorgeous colours this time round that have just started to be used. I mean, they're not brand new colours. They've been in circulation and in the colour index for years, but they're just starting to get use in watercolour, and I really, really like them. When I get to the end and bring these swatches up for you to look at, this will make a lot more sense. I am using a brush that's really too big for this. This is a size 10. For this sort of size, I would normally use about 5. So next up is Perulin Violet, which is PV29, which is Perulin Violet. Again, I love the Perulins, and this one is a kind of dried blood sort of colour. Lots and lots and lots of pigment, lifts off of... It's always hard to say the right phrase, because when I say lifting, I mean when it's dry, taking a brush across it, see if it will lift up. I'm talking about lifting off of a dried blob, I think the phrase commonly used is lift off. So maybe that's the phrase I should be using. But isn't that not just such a beautiful deep mahogany? So pretty. Next we have an interesting one, Cobalt Violet Tone, Cobalt Violet Hue. They haven't declared what this pigment is, which I presume is because it doesn't have a colour index number yet. But I will query and I'll find out what this is if they're going to let me know, because I'm curious. I mean, I use Cobalt Violet all the time and I love it. I'm always curious when they make hues of colours that are relatively easy to get hold of. Cobalt Violet itself is very similar to this, so this is a good fake. The granulation is good, but I can tell there is a lot of extender in here. There's a lot of lithopone to give it that granulation and that chalky opacity. It's a little bit too chalky for Cobalt Violet, but it does actually wet slightly more easily than Cobalt Violet, because that can be a difficult one. It's usually a case of dip the brush in Oxgall and then have a good go at it and use a cheap brush until it's made a pool of colour. Now going to look at some of these ones that we had to miss out on the first run previous. Let's just focus in down there. We are now looking at Eisenoxidbraun, which they have translated as Mars Brown, and that is PBR6, which is Mars Brown, and it is indeed, like Eisen oxide suggests, a black iron oxide. but in this case it's brown. Now Mars Brown, oh this is Mars Brown, sorry, not Mars Black, being a bit blonde here. It took me 30 years to become a natural blonde, but I am most certainly one now. So this is, it's because I'm working upside down now to what I was doing when I actually went through these and kind of got them into mental order. So this is PBR6, sorry, which is hydrated brown iron oxide. I do apologise, I mixed it up with another colour, sorry. Hate it when I do that, but I don't like to reshoot because I think if my videos look too perfect, that'll be the day, I think it kind of takes away some of the integrity, which is why I really, really appreciate people like Mandy Van Goya, Lindsay the Frugal Crafter, people like that who leave in their errors and make often a teachable moment, as Lindsay puts it, out of them, rather than trying to look absolutely perfect or apologising for their mistakes, because that doesn't help you guys. Next one is La Sur Sienna, Transparent Sienna, which is single pigment PR101, which is of course red iron oxide. So this one is going to be hopefully very, very pretty. Little difficult to re-wet, but once it gets going, that is an absolutely amazing tone. Now, if I didn't know better, I would have said that this had got a quinacridone burnt scarlet or something like that, because it is that really easy to wet, really beautiful tone that you get with the quinacridone pigment. So that's a nice alternative to Quin Burnt Scarlet in a way. It's not quite the same tone, but it's got the same feel. I don't know if anyone kind of understands what I mean by that, but it kind of like the way it flows, the way it wets, they remind me. Next one I'm going to do is this one here, which is Spinel Brown, which is PY119, which is zinc iron yellow, which is an iron zinc oxide. So it's kind of like a creamy sienna or a slightly darker yellow ochre, so almost like a brown ochre or a gold ochre. Opaque, nice, have a nice bit of granulation I think when it dries. That's really very nice. Let's move over to the row on the right, and I'm going to deliberately miss one out because I want to save it till last because I'm overexcited about it. We will do this one here, which is Eisen Oxide Schwarz, which is Mars Black. This is the one I got confused about, you see. Mars Black is black iron oxide. I got confused with Mars Brown. So let's have a go. Oh, re-wets nicely. Bit of a green undertone to this one. And Mars Black, I always think, has a bit of a brown undertone. So that's quite interesting. And let's just leave that and see how it flows on its own without too much interference. Because I note with the Graphite Black, I probably worked it a bit much and it's gone very, very even. So let's see if we can get this one to do something interesting. I'm going to go back and fill some more gaps now. Over here, so apologies that I'm not doing these in order. Someone will complain, they always do. This is La Sur Umbre, Transparent Umber, which is another PR101 synthetic iron oxide. Red synthetic iron oxide, I should say. Nice bit of transparency. That is interesting. That's got a kind of, it looks like some kind of like Maggi seasoning. For those who know Maggi seasoning, that sort of burnt sugar kind of colour to it. Very pretty, moves really well. I really like that actually. I prefer it to the green umber that is next to it because that's actually quite flat. Let's see how that looks when dry. Next we have Perlin Grün, which is Perlin Green, which I think everybody uses the same pigment for this, which is PBK31, which is Paleogen Black. That throws people because it's a black but it's a green. What does that mean? It means in mass tone it's black, so it was coded as a black, because I think it was probably originally used as a black. But when you dilute it down, it's the most gorgeous green. So fantastic. And again, when I use my Perlins, what I tend to do as my palette, in case you're interested, is I will usually have a Perlin red, perylene green, something like green gold as the yellow, and then I will usually add in indanthrene blue and quinacridone burnt scarlet, and you can get some really fantastic mixes with those colours. And the blacks, the neutrals you get, I like black ink, absolutely fantastic, totally black, totally even. So next up we have oh sorry, my legs have gone to sleep, I've had to stand up. I'm going to do this one next. This is Smaragdgrün Viridian, which is PG18, which is Viridian, hydrated chromic oxide. Re-wetting nicely there, and look at that flow on its own. I don't often like Viridian on its own, but it makes lovely mixes. Viridian with a little bit of yellow ochre, you can make a lovely forest green. Viridian is incredibly pretty. This one's nice because it's got granulation to it and it's re-wetting slowly, which is a very Viridian kind of property. Really beautiful. One of those lovely chrome containing pigments that's got that lovely intense green, that sort of slightly blue green. Really gorgeous. I'm going to do a little glaze now by way of transparency testing those two colours where I forgot them, here and here, just while the last few dry down enough that I'm comfortable with painting next to them. So we'll do a little blob there and a little blob there, and we'll do transparent red deep first on the left. I don't want to do too much glazing. I'm not going right up to the edges because I want to still see the mono layer, and then Bordeaux red. Right, we're going to have to let those dry before I can comment on the transparency, so back we go. Okay, let's finish off with these four. First one is Laser Ochre, transparent ochre, which is PY42 synthetic yellow iron oxide. And this one had a little tiny bit of glassine paper stuck to it. There was a separating sheet. So this one might re-wet a little bit oddly because it's got that little bit of paper stuck to it. Yeah, it's not giving me a lot of pigment, but then when I wet the edges, it's not either. So I think it's just a very light, very dilute yellow iron oxide. Pretty but insipid. It's kind of the opposite of me. Definitely not pretty and definitely not insipid. Next one is this one here, which is Castagne Brown, Maroon Brown. This uses, in the colour charts that Schmincke provide, this is only down as natural brown mud, so this is going to be a bespoke. They went out and dug some mud and have used it to make a paint. So that's what, you know, Wallace Seymour and other companies do. So this might be an interesting colour. Doesn't re-wet very well. I think I would want some oxgall with this. Very common with earth pigments though to get that. That's re-wetting very badly, but where it is going, it's got a nice bit of colour to it. Might get some granulation a bit later on. Well, we'll leave it and we'll see how it looks when it dries. Last of the sort of normal colours now is Hematite Schwarz, Hematite Black, and this hematite, which is iron oxide, actually uses PG17 according to the colour chart, which is chromic oxide, and I find that a little bit odd. So I'm actually going to check that they haven't made a typo. I'm just going to recheck it. I haven't checked it incorrectly. Right, they've labelled it as PG17 hematite. I would bet it's possibly PBK17 hematite. I don't know, but it's certainly not PG17, which is chromic oxide, which is oxide of chromium green, because that looks totally different to this. That is really nice. I'm just going to kind of smush up this end so that we can get that dark patch and see how it spreads. These neutrals are gorgeous. I'm really getting into these interesting blacks lately. Last, but by no means least, this is the new formulation of Brilliant Opera Rose, Brilliant Opera Rose. They have 4 brilliant colours. They have Brilliant Opera Rose, Brilliant Red Purple, Brilliant Blue Purple, and Brilliant Violet. And they've all got a combination of pigments with a fluorescent binder, just like traditional Opera Rose, to give you that fluorescence. And I think my UV light was nearby. I saw it not yesterday, so I could actually look at this with UV for you. If it shows up, I'll do it, because there it is. See, I'm not as disorganized as people say. Got it. So this should have a fluorescence underneath of a standard colour. The standard colour is PR122, which is quinacridone red. And the way Opera Rose is made is they take the fluorescent pigments, which are actually soluble, water-soluble dyes, and they coat little particles of it with a resin that resists water. So they waterproof the fluorescent dye, so it acts like a pigment, and then they put it into a normal suspension of PR122. And if you have been looking at Tim Holtz Distress Oxides, what I think they do there is take a mixture of a pigment and a water-soluble dye that are the same kind of colour, coat the dye in something that will resist water to a point, but then it will dissolve, and that's how it's liquid and you can stamp it and do stuff with it. But if you get it wet, the dye comes into solution and you get that effect. With Opera Rose, the dye won't go into solution, but what it does mean is sometimes you'll see a granulation because the particles of resin coated dye separate a little bit, especially in the tube. You see that before you even get it out, but that's normal. So just wanted to get it out there, not to worry. Of course, it's as fugitive as hell, but they have reformulated them. The other 3, have been reformulated to give them more light resistance. Brilliant Opera Rose is a new colour that joins those 4, the other 3, and the other 3 have been reformulated, and they've kindly given me the new formulation, and I've already got the old formulation that I bought in an art store a couple of weeks back. So that'll be nice because we can do a side-by-side with those. Just such a gorgeous colour. It's a shame it's as fugitive as all hell, but it's pretty. I don't think I'll get a fluorescence with it with UV. Yeah, there's a fluorescence there. I don't know if you can see that on camera. No, but I'll bring you down. I'll bring you down to camera level. See if any of the others have got any fluorescence. There's a lot of UV binder in this paper. Wow. Yeah, I'll take you down. I'll move it up to the camera and I'll knock the lights and then you'll be able to see it. It's really hard to film fluorescence, unfortunately. Right, pop my brush to one side so it can dry down, and let's have a proper look at these. Let's play with the focus a little bit. I think we can get a couple of rows on the screen at once. Don't think I need to do an extreme close-up of these particularly. Sod it, let's do it. So if we have a look at them, that rutile yellow is very Naples yellowy, but the same pigment can produce nice transparent colours, so it's a little surprised at that. That Quin Gold hue is nice, but now it's dried it looks a little bit flat, so I like it, but I need to play with it a bit more. Turner's yellow is again like a warm Naples yellow. It's very flat here, but it's got an opacity to it, and it's not as vibrant as the Winsor & Newton version. Be interesting to try it out. Gelb orange, yellow orange, that's a nice colour. It has dried a bit flat. I'm going to glaze over all these. I'm actually going to do a Lindsay the Frugal Crafter and glaze over half of each of these, and then in the part 2 video, if and when I do one, you'll see that. Geranium red, really pretty. I quite like the depth of that colour. That is really nice. Vermilion light, sorry, just to point out where we are, this is vermilion light. Very, very insipid. I think that's the paper rather than anything else. I think on a very heavily sized paper that would be really pretty. Quin red light, it's a Quin red, what can you say? It's very pretty as well. I love this Perylin red over here. I think that's got great depth to it, and I love this ruby red deep here. I think that is an extraordinary blood-like wonderful colour. Phthalo Sapphire, what is not to love? I mean, that is just a gorgeous colour. The Cobalt Violet hue is a good fake of Cobalt Violet, but I want to know what's in it. I'm going to guess it's dioxazine in a binder. Quin Purple, again, I love it. It's one of my favourite colours. Perylene Violet, like dried blood as always. Potter's Pink, gorgeous granulation, but what the hell do you do with it? Quin Magenta, fantastic as always. Bordeaux, I really like that, and that overglaze has worked really nicely. Saturn Red, I love. Beautiful orange, even more beautiful in real life and much more vibrant than the camera gives it credit for. Transparent Red Deep, again, gorgeous. Cobalt Azure, sorry, which is just a cerulean blue. It's a light cerulean blue. I love the French Ultramarine. The granulation is amazing. Viridian, again, beautiful granulation. A little bit spearminty. I always think Viridian should be darker than that. Maybe when I glaze it, I'll see that. Not a big fan of this transparent green gold. It's very flat and very heavy because it's got that iron pigment in there. So I love green gold normally. I'm not sure I love that one. Spinel Brown, again, really nice, but there's a lot of browns here and I'm just not convinced I know what to do with them. So this one is now Spinel Brown. This one is that maroon brown that they made themselves from mud. I like it, but I'm not sure what I'd do with it. Transparent Sienna, I quite like. Light ochre, transparent ochre, I think other colours would overpower it, but it could be good for mixes or for beaches. And Mars Brown I really like. I think there's a really nice depth to that brown. It's got great granulation. Opera Rose, beautiful as always. Mars Black, fantastic granulation and a really nice green undertone. Hematite Black, a little bit of sparkle in that actually, not much, but a tiny bit. Nice granulation again. The Graphite Black is this one. That rather went flat. I mean, actually, if you look at it with bright light, as you can now, you see this is where it's diffused and this is the rest. I think it's just very dark, and I might pop some onto another page at some point and have another revisit. Perylene Green I love, as always. You can see why it was coded as a black originally. Mahogany Brown, love that granulation. That's really nice. Like that light ochre a lot. That green ochre, I think you could use that for walls that have got moss on them, that kind of really sludgy autumnal greenish brown that bricks go. But I can't think of many other uses, but it is nice. Let's have a quick look at the Opera Rose with some ultraviolet light. I'm going to have to knock out some of my lighting to make this show up if it does at all. So let's have a little see. So what you'll see if it works... Okay, what you're getting reflected back now, can you see those little pink particles within it that are really bright? There's really bright pink, light pink spots where the light is shining. And they really show off in the granulation texture of this paper. They're probably showing as white on camera, but they are actually pink. That's the fluorescence, and that's what makes Opera Rose and not quinacridone red. That's what makes it, that's what's sort of so famous about Opera Rose, is that fluorescence. I'm going to let these dry down, and what I'm going to do when I do my part 2 video with these, as always in my new review structure, is I'm going to do a... By then I will have done a glaze over them, so I'm going to let them dry and then glaze over half of each one. And then I'll go through all the pans and tubes that Schmincke have so kindly sent me, and I will do a comparison of tubes and pans so that you can understand whether the tubes versus pans, which ones re-wet more easily than others, so you can get a feel for how they work and how much colour is in both of them. And then I'll go through their older colours and we'll start looking at those, and that'll be a separate video. So this one is going to be labelled as the Schmincke, the new colours they're releasing, sort of video part 1, and then there'll be a part 2 of that, and then there'll be the older Horadam colours that will work through series by series, and eventually we'll work all the way up to some of their more obscure and discontinued colours. They have done some renamings, they have changed a few names during this kind of anniversary period, so I just want to check none of these are renames of old colours, because that would be a little unfortunate. But they have renamed just a few, not very many. No, none of these are subject to renaming. These are all if they're designated as new, which all of this 30 odd paints are, then they are definitely new. So I just wanted to put that out there. I will make links for you for purchase in the UK, USA and so on of various Schmincke products. I'm now not putting them in the video descriptions because it's really limiting in format and it makes it really hard to show the pricing. So what I'm doing is in the video description is a link over to my website where I can format the price list properly. I can add notes to it. I can keep it up to date. And I'm also probably going to build a store for customers in the USA to help you find Schmincke products a little bit more easily, because I know there are so many available and you can get them in pans, or you get them in tubes, you can get them in half pans, you get them in sets. It's a bit of a minefield, so I'm going to do something to help you guys find your products a bit more easily. But they have great discounts quite often with Blick and Amazon and Jackson's, and most of the UK vendors, don't forget, people in the US will ship to you, and it's not always that difficult. You can get a package from the UK to the USA in 3 to 4 days at most these days, and it'll be in customs for probably a week. So it's not going to be the end of the world. And I know people are going to comment and say, oh, well, I had a package that took 3 weeks, I had a package that took a month. It does happen, but the norm, and I ship a lot of things to the USA, is that actually it's pretty quick these days, especially with things like paint. They go through reasonably fast. I would say about a week to 10 days. So I wouldn't worry about that. Just factor in the cost of the postage, and you'll find quite often that products are cheaper if you buy them from the UK, because of course Schmincke are only in Germany. So buying products from Europe can be a lot cheaper when it's a European brand. So thank you all very, very much, and good evening.